All right? Now that was a long break. We needed that. We needed to settle down. You will notice thinking, feeling, talking about these things this morning doesn't seem to bring up reactions at the normal level that you use to integrate them. It's not that emotional and mental, but you have emotions and stuff and reactions in every other plane that is frightened to be there. So now there's a frightening thought, but you'll have to deal with it and cope with it. Your ego has every supernatural ability that your consciousness is capable of. Collectively, this resistance, although we're not going to be so emotional, well, except you become conscious of Shri Vishnu existence, well, that's another thing. Thank you for sharing one experience. Thank you. Regardless of what you are capable of seeing in your apparent human, there's stuff that you just ignore, and collectively this resistance caused us not to be able to be in a big room because it was double booked by the hotel. Whenever I'm going to give wisdom beyond what you see in the ego, this happens. So this is the third time it happens. Each time where I'm going to give information about the ego that you do not perceive with your intellectual mind. Because in your intellect, you feel your emotions, you see your thoughts, and this is what you deal with. But there's stuff you have to get acquainted with a supernatural perception of yourself so that you can see ego reactions in the level of life, in the level of flesh, and your causality. You know, the ego as a soul, sometimes, of course, the ego as a soul has so much more compassion than the ego as a human, because the ego as a human, well, doesn't mind if someone else will suffer, okay? And the soul doesn't think in terms of suffering and doesn't want to cause suffering to others, okay? There's not that much apparent arrogance at the level of causality or wisdom or consciousness. But we do have ego at every level. And I'm talking about this ego at levels that we don't perceive as at the intellectual understanding level. So we react in a supernatural fashion and manifest, I'm having trouble this, I'm having trouble that. And then I thank you for sharing, so I'm going to use that. And there's Adi here who says, I mean, there's stuff I had in my pocket and it's not there anymore. You know, he had his hotel key card and he knows, he felt it, he verified, and then it's not there. The resistance of the ego of not wanting that makes stuff disappears. Like part of his clothing that he absolutely knows he put in his luggage are not there. Okay? Same thing happened with my belt. I had a belt, well, I don't have now. Like the belt that I made sure to put in my luggage in a specific place because of the weight loss I had in the last month or so. There's one pair of pants I know I can't handle without the belt, so I made sure I put it in with these pants. But when I reopened the luggage, the moment I was going to take these pants, the belt wasn't there. Okay? That's a symbol for me. Okay? And of course the typical easy ego is, you know what you have to keep in your pants, you know? Has nothing to do with that. That's the ego reaction. It is what, it is the places where, okay, I'm going to say Nedza and Hod in me. I had an emotional human reaction towards staying focused, holding up together, okay? And it caused a reaction. I saw it in a certain fashion. I needed to go deeper into a subject, which was for me, the courage of doing my work. Like I shared this morning, sometimes I'm challenged, and I needed that little slap in the back and keep on maha, you know. There was drama in there, and of course, there's drama, there was ego. I still felt like I needed it, but I never received it in the way I wanted. But when I integrated that, and I let go of that, so at one level I went back to a store to get myself a belt, but metaphorically, I got my slap in the back. I got my experience, but only after I had let go of control. Why am I sharing this? Because we're going to talk about just that. What if, I'm going to retake a few words I used. What if, instead of having to mechanically go faster in space to dereference yourself in time, instead of doing this in space-time, could you not just accelerate yourself locally on moving? The atoms are always in movement. Accelerate. So that mechanically, in this localized fashion, you don't seem to be using relativity, but you don't need to go to the speed of light to start to slow down in time. You can just start slowing down in time fixed here if you have charge of power. Okay? If you meditate and contemplate long enough, the unsubstantiality of what seems to be substantial, the fixity of our illusion of mass, if you take the time to really dissolve that, you can start to act a way of free from nature. Of course, natural laws still work. You'll still have all the forces of nature in there. So that whenever you're not specifically in a Brahma Shakti experience, you know, when you're not consciously manifesting or altering reality, you still have the laws of nature holding up your apparent world, which is cool. So I'm not completely in accordance with this idea that everything is an illusion. I don't agree. And even the Buddha Sakyamuni did not say this. The Buddha said everything you perceive is an illusion. He never said there was no reality. And even scolded his own priests who contemplated the inexistence of the world, saying even in reality it's unmanifested. Although it's partially true, not from their ego's point of view. And he told them, that's my favorite passage of the Mahaparinirvana Sutra. I even put it in the back of the book because I became the publisher of that sutra. It's a sutra that there's always a publisher in a language in the world. And it just happens that this wisdom is the last wisdom that the Buddha gave, that was compiled over the last years. And like people have been just barely holding on to it, always on the brink of not being able to publish it. And as a publisher right now, this is how I earn part of my money, because I don't abuse from my disciples, forcing them to pay me more. And you understand this? Those of you who didn't even pay to come here because I love you, I want you here. You know, charity experience. Well, I do Human Job, which is a publisher. And I'm the only publisher in the world right now who has the English version of that teaching. Because the Buddha is always trying to find someone who can handle the teachings. And in this teaching, he scolds his priests who misunderstand his wisdom from the previous years when he taught. And he says, there's no such thing as everything is an illusion. And you have been contemplating so long that everything is illusion, unreal, unmanifested, intangible, that everything is a dream, and everything is a flash of lightning, and nothing is really concrete, and all this is an illusion. You've been contemplating this for so long that you are actually going out of reality, and you're doing the opposite of what I want you to do. So now I'm telling you not to contemplate the impermanence of all things, because first he teaches about impermanence. So people go into the impermanence to the point of nothing really lasts, to the point of reacting to the wisdom and not even wanting something to last, and even denying the existing of something that does last. So I said, now you have contemplated impermanence. My goal was to allow you to learn how to let go of attachments. But you've pulled this so far in a misunderstanding that you even deny there's something permanent. So now I want you to contemplate the eternal. So do not anymore contemplate, after you've done with the ego, non-attachment, and all the process on yourself, do not anymore contemplate what is impermanent, but what is eternal. Do not contemplate what is soiled, but what is pure. because there's another teaching where you contemplate your decaying corpse, you contemplate yourself as no value, but they push this in a stance to think there's nothing worth anything. But the Buddha's name in his Buddha nature was the one worthy of praise. So there is something worth, even it's its name, the worthy of praise. The only thing that is worth praying, the highest divine state. Okay? So he said, now instead of always contemplating the defiled nature of human, I want you to contemplate what is pure. Do not contemplate anymore that everything is an illusion, but the true nature of the self which is real. So you have been contemplating the impermanence, the unworth, or the valueless. You've been contemplating the absence of self, the undefined state of being, and the world of illusion. Now I want you to contemplate what is eternal, pure, blissful, and real. And you will discover the true jewel. Every time you have been contemplating, well, of course there's a part of the Buddha's words in there, and there's a part of my wisdom about it, so you can find it if you search about this Mahaparinirvana Sutra. There's a phrase in there that really emphasizes on it. You can experience reality because there is such a thing as reality. Okay? So everything you perceive is an illusion. And when we try to teach you about this illusion, the first thing we have to teach you is about the inappropriate perception you have. And once you're freed from that, we can tell you about the appropriate perception, which is non-perception. Okay? So in non-action, there seems to be an action, but there is not. Depends on your state of being. In non-perception, there seems to be a perception. Actually, there's just a state of awareness. But there is something to be aware of, therefore there is a reality, but if you perceive it, it doesn't exist. Okay? What you perceive is not real, but what you are conscious of is real. Can you contemplate that? But what you are conscious of is constantly in conflict with what you perceive. Because what you perceive is that you are gross in nature, made of mass, attracted to the earth, with physical limits of the mechanical world. That is what you perceive. All your senses, including your mind, tells you that. And what you are conscious of when you do meditation is the unmasked, unmanifested state, the unlimited potential, the conscious of yourself as divine, knowing yourself as one, knowing yourself as God. What you do in meditation, in consciousness, you become conscious of a truth, a true reality. And that is a passage in the Mahaparinirvana Sutra that speaks about what is the true self and what is real, as opposed to the experience of non-self and the illusion. Okay? In this book, the Buddha addresses Brahma like he would address someone else. Meaning that sometimes he talked to God like if he was a person. Even though God is not a person, he would do like us and pray. A God. And of course, in all his other teachings, not all of them, but most of them, he says, the God that you pray does not exist. So the people say, then God does not exist. No. The God that you pray does not exist. The form in which you conceptualize God, that is an illusion. Stop that. But then there is a God. If I tell you there is a God, you're going to have a conception of what is God, therefore you won't have the real one, so forget it. So, regarding God, the Buddha said, if I tell you there is a God, you're going to have a conception of it, so I won't tell you there is a God. If I tell you there's no God, you'll also have a conception of reality that doesn't have a God, which will also be false, so I won't tell you about it. If I tell you there's no absence of God, you'll have another false conception. And if there's no absence of not a God, you'll have another false conception, so I'm not talking about it. Because I want you to deal with that insecurity of not knowing intellectually. Because people go in a state of control, so this person says, Buddha, I'm going to stop. Well, he didn't call him Buddha, he called him Tathagata, he called him that way. I'm going to stop studying with you. You're a bad teacher. So, oh, okay, I'm a bad teacher. So, want to talk about it? And he said, yes. Everything I asked you I wanted to know, you never told me all this time I was studying with you. I wanted to know what, if I have a soul or not. I want to know if I will reincarnate or not. I want to know about if reincarnation exists or not, and if there is a God. And the Buddha said, I have been answering all these questions all the time. Because from your point of view, you have objective, clear questions for which you want objective, clear answers. But I showed you, I'm not teaching you about the questions, I'm teaching you that these questions stem from the fact that you are insecure, afraid, and you are suffering right now. And I've been teaching you to be freed of the existential suffering of not knowing what was going to happen. And when you heal this existential suffering of insecurity of what will happen or not, when you heal that, then for fun, we're going to play. I'm going to tell you about reincarnation or not, and the soul and reality and everything, but before I teach you this, I have to tell you and teach you that you ask these questions out of fear of stopping to exist. And my goal is to bring you to resolve that fear of existing and that fear of not existing. Because as an ego, we are afraid to exist and afraid to stop existing at the same time. Imagine the conflict, right? And we have this at every point. Because we're afraid of what's going to happen, we're afraid of life and this and that, but if we start existing, we're afraid of ceasing. I mean, just the fundamental fear of dying is a part of that. Which is why I introduced this new chapter. Faith. Black pen. Control. Ha! Control versus faith. Faith versus control. Control is not simply an intellectual pattern or a mind system that tries to hand on to the roller coaster of life. Okay, that's way beyond. Control is every part of us that tries to do anything without consciousness. That's why we train, whatever you do it with God. Control is every part of us as an ego that tries to have what it wants. That works hard to make it happen. But of course, if you don't work hard for what you want to happen, it won't. So you're screwed. Control is a state of being. It's not what you do. You can do an action and be in a state of control, or you can do an action, exactly the same action, in a state of faith. Control will ensure you that you will suffer because you're trying to acquire something in control out of the fear of not having it. And when you act in faith, you do something, there's a goal in there, and it's okay. You do this in the optics or the mindset of the pleasure of seeing it through. Okay? Every part of you is in control until you integrate it and free yourself from that, because this control is holding on to your reality, referring to the denials of previous sessions. This reaction we have everywhere that has to do with everything in us, even places we ignore are in state of control, and we're just hanging to this reality, not wanting to let go because we're afraid or ashamed or too proud because we're in denial and we're afraid to screw up. And we're so afraid of suffering, we just hold on so much. Now the heart does it, the mind does it, and when we do integration we can see this easily. But you have atomic behaviors that do exactly the same thing. All the components of the highest plane of your consciousness as an individualized being to the deepest levels of your physical manifestation as organs, cells, proteins, molecules in the cells, and then the atoms that make them, at every level of, zoom in, zoom out to reality, we have these reflexes of something is holding on to the despair, the fear of falling back in vacuity, because there's so little of us in reality and so much in the whole of existence as God. We're just so afraid to lose it and drop out of reality and cease to exist, and that's the ego. Okay? There's so much control in us. If you try to identify this control by looking at it, if you try to identify this control by trying to see how your mind controls, you will fail. Because you know yourself as humans, you go into a state of control in an argument with someone, in how you manage the budget and how you argue about the budget with your lover, and this kind of stuff we go into control in life. Yes, Grace, do we? You know how humanly you control. You know how humanly you experience that control. But it is such a different flavor when it's made of material apparent mass, when it's made of streams of life force, because streams of life force is also yearning and wanting. It's so different when it's made of causality and wisdom. There still is control at every level up to the fourth plane where we're just pure consciousness. There is this form of control. And the more control we have, the less faith we have. What you do in a state of faith will have so much more chances of happening, but it will most of the time not happen in the way you wanted it. Because the way you want stuff to happen is in control. Now that's a mind-boggling attitude. I'm trying to teach you manifestation. You can read so much stuff about manifestation, so much information is available how to create, how to manifest. And the more you read about it, the more in technique you go, the more you are trained to believe you can manifest, which is good. And the more you go into a state of control because you think that you, from the point of the ego, you're the one doing the manifestation. But the law of attraction and all this manifestation stuff in the New Age movement, the metaphysical world of human, is still such a human, egocentric, arrogant, butt-kicking perception of how a limited ego pretends to be an accomplished God. And it's made out of technical, mechanical control with technique, with psionic devices, with systems, control, and not with faith. Okay? Because you don't know how to focus on what you want. You only know how to be afraid of not having what you yearn for. Focusing on what you want and being afraid not to have what you yearn for is two completely different ways to go about it. And when you're just afraid not to have something in your ego, you're absolutely convinced that you are appropriately, correctly focusing on what you want, but you're not. You're reinforcing your pattern of control. And there's a balance in there, in nature. The higher level of control you have, the lower level of faith you have. Okay? We could say in this case, faith is how much your soul flows into your natural incarnation. So the more your systems of control, even at the level of soul, the more systems of control are in place, the less divinity comes in. So you're not consciously, divinely rethinking reality, You're just trying to pull your way out of it with an enormous effort, with so much power. And that control holds you very tight inside you and prevents the tightly wrapped Brahma Shakti experience. It prevents that from flowing. So that Brahma Shakti, very tight, making love inside you at the core, which is Kundalini, this is shut down by control. So control is more than what you perceive when you start integrating and you notice your patterns of control. But it looks like the same thing. If you can let go of the taste of it, you know, it tastes something, control, like, oh, I really feel like control. And at one point, and she was sharing, I have an experience, and I looked at everywhere, I just don't see anything. Mentally, I just look at my mind, look at my heart, look at every level. It's still happening. And it had to do with that control of trying to hold on to her own perception and everything. And I enjoyed that she shared that because it allowed us to speak about it. That control is happening simply out of the scale of your perception. So you need to learn how to integrate stuff you don't perceive. And it works. The same way, let's say you do CD meditation, and you don't perceive with your senses, but you become conscious, because there's a revelation of what's happening. Well, in the same way you'll do this. Thank you, Brian. In the same way you'll do this. Breathe. Try to focus here. I see all of your egos trying to hold on to this wisdom, okay? So I'll repeat. The same way that you kind of supernaturally become conscious of what is pure consciousness by doing meditation. Your focus of paying attention to something beyond the scope of your senses, so we train meditation, in the same way you can transmigrate in your own ego at the level of flesh and try to perceive beyond your senses. Because your senses and your mind will tell you where's your ego in your heart and your intellect, pretty much. But to perceive the ego at the level of wisdom or causality, you're going to need supernatural phenomena. You're going to need revelation and contemplation, because there's no way your intellectual mind can reveal you any information that is beyond it. And your intellectual mind has a too hard conception of what seems to be physical reality, so your intellect doesn't know how to really taste the nature of physicality. So your ego in the 10th plane, and the 9th plane, and the 6th plane and above, we don't have enough tools, refined tools to see it. So you have to contemplate and allow the nature of what you are to reveal itself slowly. At some point you say, I feel that somewhere in my cells or in my atoms or in my genetic code, something is trying to hold on to the ride. And I'm afraid to just lose my grab and be lost forever. There's something inside us that has this. Try to find it. Okay? And you let go of control. Now physically, in the mechanical world, you will go and work. You will go and get a job. You'll go and go to a party. You'll go and eat and drink. And you'll go do exactly everything you would do if you had control. But you can do it without a control. I eat because I'm hungry, and I know at this point, if I don't eat, I would die. Because I didn't train the power to not eat. When I was younger, I could go great lengths of time without eating. And people would freak out around me and can't handle their energy, so I kind of tuned it down. Okay? Made sure I could eat a lot and enjoy and become very human and arrogant. I was always arrogant anyway. Yeah, we remember last week's teaching. So it nonetheless remains that it is only through great deals of time, with patience, determination, and contemplation of what we are, and using the Vacuity manifested meditation we just did before lunch, going into Abu, Vacuity, nothing, looking at what resists from going there, then coming back, looking at what resists coming back, what resists the phenomena. All of this is control. Okay? We just hang on very strong, and we're stuck with control. Why is that? Egocentrism. Lower your control by doing integration beyond the scope of your ego's own perception. Go and do the integration process beyond the information that even your ego will tell you about itself. For this you need to do meditation, and you need to do exhaustive observation, such as observe something for a very long period of time for it to start revealing itself. Okay? Of course, the first time you integrate, you have to go through the emotions and the mind. 21 masks of the ego, and do that roundup thing. Until you master this, until you get very acquainted with that, integrating something at the physical level or at the level of the soul will be so hard, because it's so far away, either way too dense physically or way too subtle as a soul for your intellect to grasp it. And when I teach you guys to meditate on Vishnu and Supreme Self and Brahma and God, what you are, you start to perceive that part of you that simply exists as a creator, where there's absolutely no control, because there's no fear of not having what you want. Because all that God does from the unified plane is manifest in a very universal way. What we do, we control, because we're egocentric, we're afraid not to want what we, not obtaining what we want, and we really want to do it in a very egocentric fashion. I'm going to do it on my own. And we end up screwing up stuff. And even the faithful people who really did personal growth in their heart and their mind, great personality, virtue is coming into development, they start to have supernatural ability, they still have their weight of ego denser and lighter than the mind. So at the denser levels, let's say level of life force, level of flesh, level of atom, and lighter at level of wisdom, causality, and consciousness, there's ego. Well, the ego level of consciousness, we're pretty at peace with that. But the moment it goes into causality, it also involves with karma. It like hell breaks loose. Okay, the soul has its own experience of control towards God, which is beyond it. Okay, it's very light. You're gonna find out soon enough, I guess, if you practice. Breathe. So the humility required to admit that what you really have to resolve, you have no idea what it is. And still, you're going to focus on resolving it. Accept that the fundamental nature of what you are as an individualized ego is so subtle, so more subtle than your senses and your mind, that what you have to resolve is beyond the scope of your ability to perceive it. So you'll need supernatural intervention to do that. Well, the intellect asks, how are we ever going to find out? Go with faith. Use your intuition. You will have inside the revelation of information that does not require your senses or your mind. You know, sometimes you know stuff simply by intuition. Your senses didn't give you information. Your mind didn't have to do a deduction to understand anything. It just, you knew. You're going to do that. You're going to use your supernatural state of self to integrate what is not supernatural. Therefore, you're going to have to be humble enough to let go of control so you can learn how to let go of control. It's kind of a self-sustaining system. You're going to have to let go of control and rely on faith so you can learn how to let go of control and rely on faith. But how am I going to do that if I don't first? Yes, the egg or the chicken. I know. And the last person that asked me, so Maha, what do you think? What came first, the egg or the chicken? I said, God. Whatever came before the egg or the chicken is God. The system progressively happened in nature. You know, from cells to, you know, development. So, it's a funny metaphor, but you have to think beyond this scope of what came first. Fate, so you can let go of control, or letting go of control so you can develop fate? No. God came first. Oh, now God must come first, and that will be a challenge. Because we are meant, built, founded egocentrically. So what is the ego in this egocentric pattern? God as one, where there is no separation, knows through perfect experience, perfect consciousness, that it is the Lord of all things, and it always comes first because it is the primary experience of everything. We still act that way. We individualize by crossing the abyss of the third to fourth plane. We go into density, build an ego, and as a localized experience, still think the same way. I am the source of the universe. I'm the only Lord. I'm the best one. We discover pride. We develop control. We want to manage everything, and we take for granted everything is ours because this is what we experienced before we were individualized. So we're not evil for being egocentric. We're doing exactly what we were meant to be because we're built with God substance. You know? So we're shaped and built from that feeling of I am God. I'm divine. The arrogance of the ego is when we want to think locally, I deserve everything in the universe, everyone bow down and take care of me. In the ego, we have to remember, as one, we're still only in this one consciousness. Therefore, there's only Brahma consciousness. Therefore, as ego, we have to take care of that one thing to which everything is deserved. So, take care of others. Alright? Do something for what the other will benefit rather than what you can take from it. Do something for others to share. The real experience of charity is in your action, and instead of hoping for attention, give attention to the people, and it will naturally flow through that you will have the attention you seek. If you want attention, and you do it the human way, you're going to control. And if control doesn't work, what's the next one? Manipulation. You're going to do stuff to try to get other people's attention without previously giving it to them, being in service. When there is real love, it is not enslaved to control. It is in a state of faith. I do what I have to do, and whatever I seek as an experience, I'm afraid I'm not going to have it. But I'm going faithfully. I'm going to thrive for that faith, that being beyond the scope of control, beyond my structure. So whatever I hope to experience in life, I will let go of the control on trying to do it my way. And I'll be responsible, because at one point there's a self-sustaining force here that as control let go into faith, faith gives you more control over whatever you want. And then the ego starts to say, oh, I feel so in control. Bang, your faith lowers, stuff happens, you're hurt. So you let go again in faith, because you were hurt and you're trying to heal, and then your level of faith augments, you have more, your ego reacts to that, oh, I have more control. No, you never had control. It's just that the more you had faith, the more that you let go of what you want, the more what you want happened. Therefore, you misperceive that you had control because it happened how you wanted it. You never had control. It simply started happening the way you wish. But it's still just a random event. that was purely organized by God, not by you as an ego. Whew, the conflict we have inside. I want you to look at this and breathe it and understand you still have to go out and work. The physical actions or the actions in the manifested world will be identical. They will be exactly the same thing. You go out to work and we don't always love everything we do in our work. And sometimes we despise what we really do in our work. But there's something going on. And whatever we do in sacrifice for others to grow, we are growing. And I was asked lately a question that I have not often been asked, but I loved the way it was asked. What drives you, Maha, to teach? There has to be something egocentric in there. And I answered, from the ego's point of view, my motivations are egocentric. What I love when I teach is when someone experiences enlightenment, I have such a rich and wonderful rush. And once someone accomplishes himself, I go in such a wonderful state of bliss. I just want to repeat the experience. And this person said, therefore you did it for you. I said, yes. From an ego's perception, it is egocentric. But the rush I experience when someone enlightens themselves or realizes himself, the rush I feel, I don't feel it from the ego's point of view. I feel it as one God. So why do I do it locally as a human? It is because the whole of God gets a rush when one Buddha comes. And I'm conscious at that level. So yes, it's egocentric, considering Brahma always did everything for himself because there's nothing else than Brahma in the universe. Therefore, if you want to see it from the point of view of the ego, Brahma's the most egocentric thing in the universe because he's the only one and everything is inside him. But then, if there's nothing else, how could it be egocentric? Because there's no one else to have the competition, the egocentrism towards. So you see, the rush I have, and what motivates me to continue is for these sporadic moments when I'm conscious of the realization that's happening around. So, if you want to perceive it from a localized point of view, I do it for me. And even this is still Brahma. So I do it for others. In the mind of Brahma, what is localized and what is unlocalized is the same thing. What is the experience of a unique being and what is the experience of the entire oneness is the same thing. Because Brahma perceives in a global way. But my ego would not participate if he didn't have his childish sandbox level pleasure of doing it. Because all I have to do is have a more powerful resolve to dissolve in oneness than the resolve I had when I chose to come back forever. And it would stop. But the power of my will to stay with other humans and help them is extremely powerful. And it cannot be overruled unless I accomplish myself in an even more powerful thrive. And so far, I will admit to you, although as a human I regretted being separate, as a human I regret having to face the challenges, not even once have I desired to stop coming back forever. Because I still perceive it from the plane of oneness. And even if I have my egocentric desires fulfilled, I know these desires are also desires of God as one. Now, you ego, because of that darn control, still think that whatever you acquire, the level of ego, has to be in conflict with the oneness. That's a very egocentric point of view. Why couldn't you have whatever you want? But in a way that the oneness decided and not your localized, controlled wishes. Okay? So it's an attitude. it's a very hard to get attitude. We have it at the level of individuality, causality, wisdom, intellect, emotion, life, flesh. And even in the flesh, there are 7 levels in the physical realm. From the entire system to the localized organ, nervous system as its own thing. Then you have the molecules, well, the cells themselves, then the molecules, and the atoms. Okay? So you have multi-level system that sometimes we'll call the 7 hells, all compacted in this physical existence. And the most on the surface will be behemoth, the world of flesh and beast. Okay? And then you go deeper and deeper into these cores of how your ego is folded on himself in these inner structures of the 7 planes of physicality, the 7 fields of ego of physicality. Now that's deep, to have these 7 physical, densified layers of ego on the physical plane. Just do once at a time. Okay? Do it globally as like all the physical thing. Eventually you'll know if it's atomic, molecular, cellular, organ, system, and identity as a whole. Okay? You'll just see all the variances. Okay? I didn't name them precisely. Okay? I don't want to put too much energy in this because it frightens people. Yeah. We need to give you a break. Okay, breathe. Think about this. Fear is holding control into place. I want to give a final teaching on this before we go. What holds this very tight hanging? You know, the tight wrap that is Kundalini, very hanging strong together. What tightens that Kundalini to make sure it won't go out of this self-sustained container? What? That's control, okay? When I say fear, egocentrism, can you tell me what holds on to this control? What? Pride, okay, all the denials. They're in fear, but it's actually all the denials. Okay? A very important one. Attachment. What?
Self-awareness.
Self-awareness, yeah, well, self-awareness as to interpretation. Because it's very wonderful to be self-aware. But the value you give to the awareness of I am, your definition, yes, so holding on to your identity, okay, in self-awareness, the importance of you as opposed to others. That's what you mean? Okay. All right. So I'll call it identity. And actually, I will say attachments. Okay? You can find a way to stay in control and the other 20 masks of the main ego, of course. But on each of the 7 categories of the ego masks, you have one of them that is more intense. Okay? But all your attachments, mostly your identity, okay, and your egocentrism, okay, and your fears as a denial. And I'll tell you, abandonment, okay? Sometimes we see it rejection because we're abandoned because God rejected us. Actually, it's the ego wanting to come here, forgot that he chose to, and he blames God, so it simulates rejection. He's the one rejecting me. Actually, it's just the abandonment of having left oneness. That will then compute layers and over layers of reactions and ego that will summon other emotions. Sometimes we have great guilt. Oh no, I'm so bad. I have pushed away God when I chose to come here. Well, that's another ego reaction. We simply feel abandoned of leaving home. And we want to go back home and say, hi, Dad. Can I have a bit of your richness to go to the horse again? No, and the drugs and the casino. Okay, you see, that control prevents the virtue of faith to take over. Now, another very egocentric point of view is to think that fate is to just let go of everything. So we use faith. You know, there's false humility. False humility is pride and shame. Well, false faith is irresponsibility. We're just using faith as a mask, false faith, to say, I don't really have to care about anything, just go and leave it to God. And then we're doing exactly the opposite of what's supposed to do. Because if we are divine, we have to take care of everything. Because God takes care of everything. So, you want to know yourself as God? Handle your shit. Take care of it. And because you take care of it, you go into a state of control. Fate goes away. You know, it's a process, it's a machine. We're made in a mechanical fashion that every system depends on another and they're self-sustaining. And the only way out is to go integrate to a point where we don't understand what's going on and start to integrate from in between the cogs of the machine. Break time.